Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and you're joining me for part 2 of the story today. And what is so lovely about this story is we're about to find out a curious mystery. Someone is obviously playing dreadful hoaxes on apartment number 5 on the opposite side of the road. And Mr. Spicer is always seeing fire brigades and policemen being called and pizza men delivering pizzas that were never ordered. So something curious is going on opposite the road to them, and we're about to find out all about this mystery. And let's get started with tonight's story. One day, about 3 months after the couple moved into apartment number 5 across the road at the Prt2of4 residence, the postman had asked the Spicers to keep a package for the Knoxvilles. Errol had pointed out that he'd been observing the very strange shenanigans going on all over again, with fire brigades, police cars being sent to the property when the Knoxvilles had never called them out in the first place. The postman, a jovial man with a great sense of humour, was a good friend of the Spicers. They often engaged in light-hearted banter with him, and this morning was no exception. "The mind boggles," he said to Mrs. Spicer, "that so many people have moved into apartment number 5 across your road and abandoned it within months. It does make me wonder rather curiously if the apartment may possibly be haunted. I wouldn't be at all surprised, you know. That place is old enough, and older houses, they have their secrets, do they not?" "What do you mean?" asked Evelyn. "You must forgive me for being so sceptical, but I don't believe in all that stuff. I personally think when you pass away, you just go to another dimension. You don't hang around here, do you? I believe in heaven, of course I do, and in the afterlife. But I've never believed in ghosts. Never have, and never will, you know." "Well, you can believe in heaven, but you can also believe, Mrs. Spicer, that some spirits are very reluctant to cross over to the other side. When they have unfinished business, they may not even know that they are dead, or they don't want to leave the place in the first place, that they grew very attached to in life, that they considered to be their home. Or they could be trapped here sometimes, even by a malevolent entity that won't actually let them cross over. Sometimes they don't even see the light. It needs to be pointed out to them. That's what I've been told. I was much like you know, Mrs. Spicer. For a long time I was. I was the typical doubting Thomas about ghosts. I would have laughed at anyone who believed in such nonsensical things, and lightly thought them delusional. That, of course, all changed after I became a postman. Some people think working for the postal service is a boring job, but I beg to differ. I've got stories to tell, Mrs. Spicer, that would make your hair curl. I've been a postman for many, many long years, and I've seen outlandish things, you know, in my time, that I could never, ever explain. At one time I used to deliver post to the old Louisville area, which you do know consists of superbly preserved Victorian architecture and hundreds of stunning Victorian homes. By all accounts, the place is swaddled in a rich, flamboyant, rather vibrant history that you can actually tangibly feel. When I used to make my postal deliveries all those years ago, I remember thinking it would be so much more appropriate, Mrs. Spicer, to be riding a horse and chariot down some of those narrow streets. It seemed wrong, almost an offence, so to speak, to be driving a postal van, as if it was a blot on the landscape, as funny as that may sound to you. The history there is vibrantly current. You feel almost as if at the press of a button you could go straight back to the 1800s. Let me tell you, Mrs. Spicer, many of my customers, living in those resplendent historic residences, told me about strange idiosyncratic things that they'd seen over the years. Sometimes those bizarre things were going on in their own homes. Most of it was pretty benign. You know the kind of things. Strange footsteps on the landing, a muffled cough, a giggle you cannot explain. Many would hear horses' hooves in the middle of the night, trotting down the streets, when nothing was there. It never alarmed them, you know. They were intrigued, let me tell you. I mean, who wouldn't be? I had an experience myself, Mrs. Spicer, that I've never forgotten. It really floored me, you know. By all accounts, it blew my paradigm of the world apart, like shattering a piece of crystal. Let me tell you, Mrs. Spicer, I've never been the same since. My wife used to call me a cynic, because I used to dismiss anything paranormal as just hocus-pocus stuff and nonsense. Not anymore. My stunt as a postman in old Louisville made a believer out of me. So you're saying, Bert, that you had an outer-worldly experience? Asked Evelyn. How absolutely extraordinary. What happened? Oh, please do tell me, Bert. You know me. I love a good story. And I'm not letting you get back into your postal van until you tell me it. Well, Mrs. Spicer, this is not just a story. It's a true personal account. It happened to me. And it is unambiguously clear in my mind. It could have happened yesterday. Well, I want to hear it, Bert. Please go on. I'm very interested. I think my Errol is going to seriously regret not hearing this himself. He's out playing bridge with friends right now, even as I speak. He's going to be so sorry to have missed out on this incredible conversation. My Errol is interested in mystery, and he is much more open-minded about these things than I am. Well, where shall I begin then? I was working in old Louisville as a postman, Mrs. Spicer. I would always deliver post to a Mr. and Mrs. Mollington. A charming, very well-to-do elderly couple they were, in their early 80s, both in robust, very good health. You will find many very traditional folk who love history, have invested in property in the old Louisville area, and have been living there for a long time. Mrs. Mollington was always impeccably dressed, well turned out, without a hair out of place, always wore pearls and cashmere sweaters, and her husband Lawrence likewise was equally well dressed. He wore traditional tweed jackets all the time, a cravat in his shirt every single day of the week. He had shoes that were so shiny you could see your reflection in them. They lived in an old Victorian, which they recently renovated by extending the kitchen, as his wife loved to cook and she wanted plenty of space. When you do that, you can stir up paranormal activity. I was delivering a parcel to the Mollingtons one day. I knocked on their door and was surprised when a man wearing a top hat and tails opened the front door to me. I was expecting to see Mr. Mollington, who was not in that morning. I was eyeballing the strange man with a rude astonishment, like you do when someone seems to look a little out of place to you, if you know what I mean. This man did not belong to the 21st century, like a red queen would not belong on a black and white chessboard. I mean, he didn't fit with the fashion of this generation. He was dressed in 1800s clothes without a single shadow of doubt in my mind. He was very distinguished and well-to-do, a polished gentleman with very good manners. In truth, he was as real as you and me. He told me that the Mollingtons were out, but he would sign for the package instead on their behalf. He told me he was staying at the residence until he felt like going away, which was a strange thing to say. I thought maybe this gentleman was a relative of the Mollingtons, and was passionate about 1800s dress, and probably was a member of the Historic Society. I know they have lots of dress-up events in town, organised by the Historic Society, given the history of old Louisville. I was actually going to ask him if there was a dress-up event going on in town, but for reasons I do not know, I never inquired about that. The man signed for the Mollingtons' parcel, and I went on my merry way, thinking nothing more of the experience. The next day the Mollingtons asked me how I got their parcel into their house, as they had found the parcel on the front desk in their entrance hall, and they were naturally perturbed about this, as no one had been on the premises to answer the door, in order to retrieve the parcel that they had been expecting. I told them a rather debonair, polished gentleman, in a top hat and tails, had answered the door, and taken delivery of their parcel, and had signed for the package on their behalf. Both the Mollingtons were completely bewildered and rather bemused about this, as you would be. They told me no one had been at home, and furthermore they had no guests staying on the premises with a penchant for dressing up in 1800s regalia. I was to find out that there were no dress-up events in town to explain this man's old-fashioned attire. When they told me this, I was confounded. There were no words, as I'd never believed in any of this stuff. We checked the signature for the package, and discovered that the person that signed for the parcel was a gentleman called Stuart Roxburgh, and this was a man who had lived on the property in 1835, died a long time ago. And let me tell you this, his handwriting was magnificent. I've never seen such stunning writing before. I think they call it calligraphy, don't they? But I'll tell you this, Miss Spicer, people don't write like this today. It's a lost art, it is. I realised that I'd handed over the Mollingtons' parcel to a ghost. That gave me the chills, let me tell you. It took me a while to get my head around that. When I told my wife about the event, she cracked up laughing. She thought it was hilariously funny. She said, "That will show you, Bert. Your days of being a doubting Thomas have sadly come to a rude, very abrupt end." I do know that over the years funny things happened in that old Victorian residence. But the Mollingtons described Stuart Roxburgh as a helpful, friendly ghost, so they weren't unhappy about his presence in their home. Unfortunately, not all ghostly entities are like that. There was one house in the old Louisville area on my delivery route that looked very grim indeed. I hasten to say, Mrs. Spicer, I loathed delivering post to that address. I really did. I always felt as if I was being watched. And you know something, even on a sunny, bright day, that entire house seemed to be cast in a dark, oppressive shadow, as if the sunshine itself was avoiding the house like a bad omen. Sometimes I could swear I saw an ambiguous, very dark silhouette staring at me from the upper floor window. I always got the impression they were glowering down at me. I was sure I'd seen the menacing face of a young man who appeared to be very angry. I persuaded myself it was all in my imagination. I shrugged it off as you do. But I never liked that house one little bit. I was always completely staggered that people would choose to buy the place. It had such a bad vibe to it. It was like there was an invisible keep-out sign plastered on the front door that you might not physically see, but boy, you could tangibly feel it. Over the years, many people incongruously bought that place, over and over again. It went through many hands. Granted, it was a beautiful house, but there was something wrong with it. I'd sometimes share the postal shift with a man called Marcus Drucannon. He simply hated delivering post to that property. He had a worse reaction to the place than I did. "I don't like that house one bit," he would say. "It gives me the creeps. Please, will you drop the post off for me, Bert? You've got a cast-iron stomach. I can't possibly do it." Since he was so terrified of delivering post to the house, I agreed to do it very reluctantly. Someone had to deliver the post. I would practically throw it through the slot in the doorway, and I would hightail it out of there as fast as I could. I'd have prickles running down my neck.
That old Victorian went on the market as regularly as apartment number 5 across the road. Probably more. The people couldn't leave the place fast enough. Sometimes only days after moving in. I was very curious about this matter. So I asked the next-door neighbour, an old lady called Violet Edgerow, who'd lived in the next-door property for over 50 years, if she knew why so many people moved in and out of that property so frequently.
"There's something going on at that house, but," she told me in a whisper, "no one stays there long. Over the years, priests have visited the place, to bless it, to no avail. People practicing Wicca, stuff like that, try to get to the bottom of what is going on there. Let me tell you, something untoward is definitely going on. And whatever it is, it refuses to leave the property. I've never liked the place one little bit. It's got a morbid history, A man murdered his wife there in 1872, I'm told. Or somewhere thereabouts. Dear me, I'm not very good with dates, I gather he thought his wife was cheating on him. Someone in town had seen her in the arms of another man and told her husband about what he had observed. That night he returned to the house in a jealous, drunken rage and strangled his wife to death. It is believed he buried her in the backyard. Tragically, it turned out the man she had thrown her arms around was her long-lost brother, whom she hadn't seen in a decade. So her displays of affection were very understandable. It was a dreadful misunderstanding. The husband learnt about his grievous mistake when the brother of the woman visited the residence the following morning, looking for his sister again. The woman's husband was so distraught for the blunder he had made that he hanged himself in his closet. Oh, it was tragic, very tragic. No wonder the house has such a grim appearance. When I heard that tale, Mrs. Spicer, I thought to myself that no wonder the place felt so formidable and desolate. It reflected the man's emotions after he discovered what he'd done to his wife. I believe the dark silhouette I kept seeing in the upstairs windows was of that man who hung himself in the closet, and I think he's still angry with himself for killing his wife, and cannot move on. And when you're angry, you exhibit a very dark energy that will drive everybody away, which is why I suspect people have been leaving the house. Evelyn raised a brow. "You, Bert, I think I'm going to have to invite you over for dinner some evening. You don't half have some interesting stories. So tell me, what did this Violet Edgway say about this gloomy Victorian? Did she believe the man who hanged himself in the closet haunted the place like you believe? Was that her opinion as well?" "In a manner of speaking, she did. She told me one of the people that had moved into the property came over to her house, asking questions about the history of their place. Did she know anything about it? They revealed to her they were terrified of living there, that during the night their beds would be shaken while they were asleep in bed. There would be uncomfortable banging on the walls, and the faucets in the kitchen would go on and off, and sometimes the bathwater would be left running, and the bathroom would be flooded. One night the neighbours saw what she described as this apparition, cast in a bluish light. It was of a young man wearing Victorian costume, and he screamed at her, 'This is my house! Get out!' The very next day she put the house on the market and fled. And that's what's been happening there. And no spiritual mediums appear to be able to get him to cross over. I think he's afraid of what the other side might represent, because he murdered his wife, if you get my drift." "Goodness gracious me," said Evelyn. "That is extraordinary. And, as you say, what a tragic tale. I had no idea things like this actually go on. I must live a very sheltered life, Bert. We've lived in this 1920s house, me and my husband, for many long years, as you well know. Nothing strange has ever happened here. I
know people did die on this property, but I expect they crossed over to the other side without a hitch. Do you think that something weird like what happened at the house in Old Louisville is happening over the road from us at apartment number 5 in the Patchouli residence? My husband told me that the Simpsons left in a dreadful tearing hurry, even before they put the house on the market, well, their apartment on the market, so to speak. And he said the estate agent looked somewhat bemused about selling the place yet again. I wouldn't be remotely surprised, Bert admitted. As I said, Mrs. Spicer, I've seen things that make me realize there is a lot going on in our world that we can't even begin to comprehend. Bert nodded at Mrs. Spicer, gave her a wink and said, Have a nice day, Mrs. Spicer. It's good to talk to you. Thank you for keeping the Knoxville's parcel for them. I really appreciate it. I left a note on the door of their apartment, so I dare say they'll be over to pick it up from your residence later on. I really thank you, Mrs. Spicer, for helping me with all the packages in the neighbourhood when people aren't in. You're a trooper. It does make my job a whole lot easier. Later that afternoon, Evelyn's dogs began barking excitedly. That was when she heard the knock at the front door, and immediately suspected that one of the Knoxvilles had popped over to pick up the parcel she'd kept for them. She opened the door to a young woman in her 30s, who was clearly out of breath. She must be eager to get her parcel, Evelyn thought. The young woman's flushed face grew as pink as a peony. She looked at Evelyn rather nervously, her long blonde ponytail swishing from side to side. Her blue eyes looked somewhat disquieted, like a pigeon that had moments before been caught up in the cat's jaws, and was having a degree of difficulty calming down from the experience. I'm so sorry to disturb you, ma'am. I live over the road at the Patchouli residence, in apartment 5. The postman left a note on my door. I understand you kept a parcel for me, and that the postman leaves parcels with you if people are out. I really appreciate you keeping it for me. I've been expecting this parcel for a couple of weeks now. It's a collection of essential oils I've ordered from a company called doTERRA that I'm looking forward to using. I've been doing an aromatherapy course, you see, learning all about the essential oils you can use. It's no trouble at all, dear. It's lovely to meet you. Usually me and my husband are always at home, you know. We're retired, so it's no skin off our nose keeping parcels for the residents in the area. Do please come in, will you? I'll go and get the parcel for you. It's in the kitchen. It sounds like you're eager to get your hands on those essential oils. I love essential oils myself. Always have, you know. My absolute favourite is neroli, jasmine and rose. Put a few drops of that in your bath water, and you've gone to heaven and back. The smell is exquisite. Nothing like it, if you ask me.
Those are my favourites too, said the woman enthusiastically. I also love sandalwood and clary sage. They say when it comes to aromatherapy, you're instinctively drawn to the scents your body needs the most.
Well, that sounds very interesting. I never knew that. But that makes perfect sense to me. Evelyn noticed Mrs. Knoxville was looking apprehensive, a little like a deer caught in headlights. Her whole body twitched nervously, like a rabbit emerging from a burrow, afraid that it's going to be pounced on by an unsuspecting fox loitering in the dark shadows.
Oh, I must apologise. You must think me awfully rude. Well, I haven't introduced myself yet. My name's Lara Knoxville, and as you know, I've moved in over the road. It's an adjustment for us. We used to live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, you see. My husband and me, well, we're from there. We relocated to Kentucky for business purposes. I feel a bit like a fish out of water living in another state like this. It doesn't help that my family and friends are so far away, so you can feel awfully alone at times.
Well, it's lovely to meet you, Lara, said Evelyn, reaching out to shake the young woman's hands that felt clammy in her own. Lara's eyes darted around Evelyn's kitchen nervously, and then at the parcel she was holding in her hands that Evelyn presented her with. She took it from Evelyn rather reluctantly. She was about to say something when Evelyn suddenly interjected. So how are you enjoying Sunnyvale Close and your new apartment in the Patchouli residence? I've never been in one of those apartments before, but I'm told they're absolutely superb."
The young woman didn't meet Evelyn's gaze, and then very suddenly 2 fat tears rolled down her cheeks. This reaction to her casual inquiry Evelyn did not expect. She didn't know how to react to this poor young woman, who looked as if she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, and Evelyn suspected this was not the first time that Lara Knoxville had broken down in tears. She noticed the young lady's eyes on close inspection were puffy, and there were conspicuous dark shadows under them that suggested she may not have been sleeping well of late. She knew that moving into another state could be tough going, but there was more to this young woman's sorrowfulness than actually met the eye.
"Oh, my dear, are you all right?" said Evelyn kindly. "You're crying, dear. Whatever it is, I'm sure it's not that bad. Nothing ever is, you know. How about I make you a nice cup of sweet tea, so you can talk about it if you like? I imagine you must be dreadfully homesick, being so far away from home. It's perfectly natural to break down. I mean, Albuquerque, from what I understand, is 21 hours away from here by car. Let me tell you, dear, any move is always an adjustment. Believe me, I know all too well. My family's initially from Florida, you know. When I moved here all those years ago, it was a major adjustment for me. But I promise you it will get easier with time, especially after you start making friends here. Folk around here are very friendly. They'll make you feel very welcome. And before you know it, you'll believe the bluegrass state is home. It grows on you. And once it does, I can promise you this, you'll never want to leave. I go back to Florida myself regularly to see old friends of mine and extended members of my family. But I consider this place to be home now."
Evelyn's kindness meant the young woman began to blubber, and try as she might to fight back the tears, they fortuitously spilled down her face.
"Oh, I'm so sorry," said Lara. "You don't even know me, and I'm blubbering like a baby. This is so embarrassing. I assure you, I'm not normally like this. But moving here, it's been so hard. Everything's gone so badly awry. Sometimes I feel as if I must be losing my mind. My husband thinks I've been out of sorts since we moved here. He's right about that. But half of this stuff hasn't been happening to him, so how can he possibly understand what I'm going through? He's not here half the time." "You can tell me about it, dear," said Evelyn. "I'd like to help if I may," she said generously. "Now you sit down over there, and I will make you a nice sweet cup of tea, shall I? You're welcome here any time you like. Please regard me as a friend, the first of many you will likely make around here." "I am most sure of that."
Lara Knoxville gratefully flopped into the upholstered chair at the kitchen table, like a rag doll. Evelyn handed her a box of tissues so she could wipe away her tears.
"Are you going to be all right, love?" she asked with concern in her voice. "I'm just worried about you."
Lara Knoxville composed herself. She straightened out her slumped posture. She nodded, blowing her nose into a tissue.
I'll be fine in a minute," she assured Evelyn. "But tea sounds great. It really does. I'm more of a coffee drinker, you know. But right now, I couldn't think of anything more inviting than a cup of tea."
"Coming up," said Evelyn. Before long she was busying herself at the hob, preparing a cup of tea for the both of them, which she poured from a blue kettle on her range cooker, into her favourite blue and white china teacups. When people were upset, she had learnt that tea was the drink of choice to calm down flayed nerves, and it appeared to be working, as Lara Knoxville seemed to relax after she drank a few sips of the sweet concoction. The colour returned to her cheeks, the tears abated.
"I'm so sorry about this. I don't know what overcame me." "Don't you dare apologise to me, young lady. It's good to cry, to let your emotions out. That's what I always say. It's the people that don't cry that have the problems. It's a release, isn't it? So tell me," said Evelyn, sitting down opposite Lara, You're not having problems at apartment number 5, are you? Is that what this is all about?" The woman's eyes grew round in bewilderment. "How do you know?" she asked. "Well, I do know that many people have abandoned living there over the last couple of years. Moved away in haste."
"Really?" said the young woman, her eyes widening in surprise. "I didn't know that. But then why am I not surprised? The estate agent wouldn't likely tell us that kind of thing."
"Well, it's true, I'm afraid," said Evelyn gingerly. "The Prt2of4 residence is an old property. It was commissioned to be built by a ship's captain in the 1920s. He had 15 children, you know. He was away from home a lot of the time. He wanted his family to have the perfect house to live in while he was away at sea. I understand he was an upstanding member of the community, was well liked in these parts. But even old houses," said Evelyn, "well, they have history, don't they?"
"Yes, but I like history. And the Prt2of4 residence has got a happy energy to it. I fell in love with the apartment the moment I saw it. I mean, the apartment is absolutely stunning. Nothing to complain about there. Everything would be so perfect if it wasn't." The woman's words trailed off, and Evelyn could not work out what she was saying, as they became all but a mumble.
"So it's not haunted, then?"
"Oh, goodness gracious me, no," said Lara. "Thank God for that. I can barely cope with things as they are at the moment. Look at me. I'm falling apart. I'm an absolute nervous wreck." She lowered her voice to a whisper. "You could say that I am being haunted, in a manner of speaking. But the ghost in question is very much alive, and I have no idea who they are. But someone wants us out of apartment number 5, and has been trying to scare me half to death. And it's working. It feels so personal, almost as if someone's got a vendetta against me, if you know what I mean. Ever since I've moved into the apartment, strange things have been happening to me."
"What kind of strange things, my dear?" asked Evelyn cautiously.
"Well, for a start, the fire brigade. Well, they turned up at the apartment twice, during the day that was. They weren't remotely happy with me. They claimed that I'd made a 911 call, which I never did. Apparently I told them that our apartment was on fire, and that I'd set a chip pan alight. I gave them my name as Lara Knoxville. I told the firemen that I'd never called them out. They weren't amused. I don't think they believed me. They were saying that they'd been called to the apartment on numerous occasions in the past, by previous owners, and it had always been a hoax caller. I assured them I never called them. Then the police came in the middle of the night one time, when my husband was away. Blue lights flashing, sirens going off. Someone had called them about a break-in. Let me tell you, these people were not amused. They were telling me they didn't have time for pranksters phoning 911 for the hell of it. But I would never ever do a thing like that. I've had pizza delivery men rocking up at the doorstep with over a dozen pizzas. The man from Taco Bell and a Chinese takeaway place. I apparently ordered all these things when I never ever did. I feel as if I'm responsible for messing with people's lives and their livelihoods, but I'm not. I had the mobile pet groomers arriving to pick up my so-called golden retriever for a cut and wash. And I don't own a golden retriever. I have a short-haired Jack Russell and a Dachshund mix called Chubby Chops, who will never need his hair cutting a day in his life. Then a plumber arrived at my front door, saying he'd been called out as my toilet was blocked. The irony was that my toilet was actually blocked. That's a funny thing about it. So I actually invited him in to attend to the problem because I was about to call a plumber. I needed a plumber, so I thought I might as well use him. Do you know, he asked me why me and my husband used so much toilet paper. It was so embarrassing. There was a ton of it in the loo, blocking the pipes, as if we'd wiped our bottoms in one sitting with over 100 loo rolls and tried to flush all that stuff down the toilet. Someone blocked that loo on purpose. And to do that, they must have been in our apartment. I think they're using a burner phone so that no one can trace who they are.
Evelyn's face paled. That is horrifying. I don't know what to say, love. Over the last year, my husband has noticed fire engines and police cars, as well as delivery drivers, rocking up at the Patchouli residence, obviously intending to serve apartment number 5. They always look frustrated as they leave the place. He noticed it was happening all over again, to you, after the previous residents left in a hurry. So my guess is whoever's been doing this to you wants you to leave the place. But if they've been in your apartment, that is most unsettling."
"There is more," said Lara, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "A lot more, I'm afraid. Not only have all these untoward things been going on, but as I was saying, someone's definitely been in our apartment. The weirdest thing of it all is I've changed the locks 3 times. It makes no sense to me that items of mine have gone missing, most especially a photograph album of mine that is so precious to me. Then I found a dead rat in my knicker drawer, and I found the doodah that I'd thrown in the downstairs dumpster that I had picked up after Chubby Chops when he did his business on the street. The package of doodah was placed in my refrigerator. Then strange rotting produce has also been placed in there that stank because it passed its sell-by date and had gone off. Then there was this horrible, atrocious smell in the apartment that simply wouldn't go away. And I tried to look for it, and for a long time I couldn't find it. And then I traced it to a cushion on my settee. I opened up the cushion, and there was old rotting fish that had been maliciously sewn into the cover to stink out the apartment. I got the feeling that I was being watched. It was so creepy." Evelyn was disquieted by Lara's sobering revelations. No wonder the poor woman felt she was going mad and was overwrought with anxiety. She was clearly the unfortunate victim of a warped prankster who wished to cause her emotional distress.
"Have you told the police what you've told me? What's been going on in your place, I mean? Because it's not funny. From the sounds of things, love, someone is making hoax calls on your behalf, putting nasty surprises around your apartment. They have unlawfully, illegally entered your apartment. No wonder you're so upset. I would be really rattled if this was happening to me."
"Yes, I did call the police, as it happens. But the officer I spoke to was the very same man that was called out on the hoax. So he looked at me as if I'd lost leave of my senses. He said to me,
"Ma'am, I think you need help. Have you thought of therapy?"
I knew then that he believed I was claiming these things were happening to me, just for the purposes of gaining attention, like those women who have Munchausen by proxy, who deliberately harm their own children, just so that they can be in the spotlight of everybody's attention. You should have seen the scathing way he looked at me. I knew he thought I was doing this for attention, so there is no way on God's earth I'm going to phone them again. The way that officer looked at me, he looked like he thought I belonged on a funny farm."
Oh dear. This is such a mess. Someone is getting into your apartment, and they must be stopped."
I know. What do you think I should do about it? It's so upsetting," said Lara. "How do they keep managing to get in? That's what I want to know, especially since I've changed the locks 3 times. And that's not all. I've been getting weird phone calls on my cell phone. When I answer the call, there's heavy breathing like this down the line. Ha! Ha! So this person has also managed to get hold of my cell phone number for reasons I don't understand. I keep wondering who can be doing this to me." Evelyn was sympathetic towards Lara's most unfortunate plight. She was well acquainted with the discomforting feeling of having your personal space invaded. When she was a little girl, her family had returned home from a summer vacation to find that their house in Florida had been cleaned out, the carpets covered in matches and candle wax, and their stuff all gone. There had been a lot of robberies in the local area at the time, and no one knew who was at the bottom of them. When they'd been away, their house had been targeted. She remembered her mother describing the feeling of being violated, knowing someone had been on their property while they were away. One day her mother had been taking a swim in her swimming pool and observed that she was being watched. She discovered there was a mysterious man sitting on the neighbour's roof, watching her as she swam. She pretended not to notice him, and when she got into the house she called the police. The man's name was Sam McCarty, and he'd been robbing the houses in the neighbourhood. He had been watching the comings and goings of local people by hiding out on people's roofs. It turned out he was staying in the neighbourhood with his grandparents, who had no clue that their 25-year-old grandson was getting up to all this nonsense. Evelyn thought it must be 1,000 times worse for Lara Knoxville to sense that someone had been in her private space, taking some of her personal belongings and leaving behind a plethora of nasty little surprises to cause the young woman much angst. Whoever was doing this to her was clearly not of a sound mind. Evelyn wanted with all her heart to help Lara Knoxville to get to the bottom of this enigmatic mystery before she and her husband abandoned apartment number 5, like all the other couples before her had done. Evelyn thought of the perfect person to help in this situation, her husband, of course. Lara Knoxville blew her nose into a tissue very loudly. "I'm so sorry," she said apologetically. "I didn't mean to tell you all my problems like this. I mean, I don't even know you. But you remind me of my late grandmother back in Albuquerque. She was such a great listener. You're a lot like her, and you even look like her. It's quite uncanny, really." So there we are. That is the end of part 2 of our story. Part 3 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.